Welcome back to another episode of the BJJ Lab podcast. I'm here again with Coach Joonas, and again we're going to talk about competition. Today we're going to go a little bit more in depth about the actual preparation and strategies that you can do, or that we've done before, our experiences, and how you to get ready for the competition. So we've talked a lot about the stresses and the emotions that you feel when you compete. And it's not just the first time, it happens every time. It's just how you deal with it that affects the actual outcome, I would say. And we'll go over some of those strategies today. So you mentioned some mental training, so I think that would be a good start. Let's walk us a little bit through what you did and or how you would recommend someone to do it.
All right. So I think for the mental thing to work well, I think it's also very important that you are physically in the spot where you have to be. So I think the most important or the most fundamental part for competition is still your skill set and your conditioning. So it is very important, to have this foundation set and good to go when you get to the competition area. Because if you feel that you cannot trust what you know, and you feel that your conditioning is off, it's going to affect you mentally as well and emotionally.
Yeah, because then you kind of have to lie to yourself about what is possible to do, right?
Exactly.
It's a lot easier if you have to convince, you're already really nervous and there's all this stress going on, and it's already really hard to convince your head that you belong there and you're ready to do this. So if you're not there and you have to convince your brain that you're there when you're not, it's a lot harder than, of course, when you can back it up.
Definitely. So I think, going to your coach and asking them if they have good recommendations about the game plan, competition strategy is the first thing to do. So what do you think? What's the most important thing there?
I mean, in the end, it's a whole thing. I talked about this in one of my match analysis, and that's just something. I think I took it from Jugend und Sport, like the youth sport association here in Switzerland, and it's those 4 basic areas that are important for performance in sports. And you have the physical side of things. Let me remember it. So there's physical and mental, but there's also, of course, now I'm blanking out, Lewis. Do you remember it?
I don't think I've seen it.
Okay, so it's the square, and you have so there's technical and tactical and physical and mental, I believe. Might be wrong. Don't quote me on this. But you have those 4 different areas that all play together to get to peak performance. And physical, of course, includes things like strength, conditioning, speed, flexibility, everything that has to do with how your body performs, or at least the capacity to perform. Then you have the mental side of things, where it's do you think you're ready? What's your it's not even game plan. This is just the mental state, the emotional mental state, basically. And then on the other side, you have technical and tactical. So the technical is just how well you do the technique from your sport, or in our the techniques in BJJ, of course. And then the tactical that goes beyond the techniques, are you doing the right thing at the right time, and do you have the right strategy to win against your opponent? And all those 4 play together, and a lot of times you can lose a match if you mess up on only one of those 4. And today we're talking about the mental one, but it's important that you have the other ones in order, because you cannot win a match with just one of them. You need the whole picture.
Yeah. And now I think it's also probably pretty important to say that don't wait until you're in your your physical performance when it's peaking to go into a competition. I don't think it's necessary, but I think it's important to feel that you're fit and you're ready for it.
So that's actually a good point, because you might you'll never. That's another. I mean, the other thing is you'll never feel ready for a competition. I don't think I've ever felt ready. or if I have, it didn't work out. Actually, a lot of the times when I had better results was when I didn't feel ready at all. I think my best competition so far was San Jose, where I closed out both my division and the open weight with a teammate, with some lucky brackets, of course. But that was actually a week after I pretty much broke my foot from a toe hold tournament before. I mentioned this in the last episode, but I was tapping early because I knew I had the tournament again a week later, and the guy still destroyed my foot, and he popped 4 or 5 times, and I could barely walk. But somehow it didn't matter at all. I went to the tournament with no expectations. I just wanted to get it done. It was at the Kaioterra Association camp, the tournament before. I just wanted to do the camp, not get any more injuries. But everything worked out that day, and I think I even submitted everyone, which usually also doesn't happen, just by having no expectations and just going there to play instead of to stress out. So you'll never be ready. Or at least you'll never feel like you're ready, because you can always do more. There's always that you could have go running one more time, you could have do one more drilling session, one more sparring session, but you just have to accept it. And at the time of the competition, you know you did what you could do, and it doesn't have to be 100%. 80% is good enough. Perfect is the enemy of good, or like all those quotes come into play as well for the preparation. So doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything. Again, like Joonas mentioned, it's important that you're in shape, that you're ready, technically, physically, tactically, and mentally. But it doesn't have to be 100%. 80% is good enough, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I think like a very good cue to for yourself would be if you already had some competitions, and you watch your competition footage a couple of months after or 6 months after, then you realize that you were not ready for that competition because you're making a lot of mistakes. But then again, you see that this competition was useful for you because now you're seeing those mistakes and you have the chance of actually fixing them. If you think about it this way, then if you never went to that competition, then you would have never fixed your mistakes.
That's a good point. So competitions really help you to learn. So usually, like at least most of the mistakes you make in competitions, you will never do again. In training, it's easy to just ignore a mistake, put it under the rug or whatever. In competition, it with all the emotions going on, it hurts you deep inside, I would say. Those mistakes, especially the ones that cost you a match, and it's usually more than one. There's always it goes downhill, and you usually have to do a couple mistakes to actually lose a match because your opponent is also not playing perfectly, at least not on the level we're playing, and definitely not at white belt or blue belt. But since there's such a big emotional attachment to those mistakes, I always rewatch my matches over and over and make sure I drill the things that I did wrong and make sure they never happen again. And
I can assure you, the mistakes that I did in the first 2 matches in the Europeans, I won those matches, but those mistakes really hurt. If I look at the footage now, it's awful.
Yeah, I have to say, now I'm going through my old matches for the analysis, and especially the longer back they are, the worse it gets, because my jiu-jitsu was a lot worse, of course. But even the ones where I won, I'm like, what did I do? Or how did that work? That's crazy.
Yeah. So you see, there's always a little bit of an element of luck there as well.
Yeah, for sure. But you also mentioned something really important, and that's if you didn't do the competition, you would not be as good as if you would have done it, right? So every competition acts like a small bump to your skill level that you wouldn't have had otherwise, I would say.
Definitely, yes, absolutely.
And one part is what you learn in the competition, but a big part, in my experience, is the preparation, because it's easy to just coast in training, and you get better, you just train, you drill, whatever. But if you sign up for a competition, I just feel like you train a little bit more, you think about jiu-jitsu a little bit more, and that gives you a skill bump that you also wouldn't have had if you didn't do the competition. So let's say even if you sign up for a competition and something happens on the day and you can't go, chances are you probably still got a lot better compared to if you wouldn't have signed up.
Yeah, I think it's even fair to say that this is absolutely true what you're saying right now, because the decision to start competing was definitely the biggest boost I ever had until now in my jiu-jitsu. It actually, the improvement that followed after that has been the biggest improvement that I've made so far, because it actually gave me a very good guard, or at least I feel a good guard, good enough to go into competition and, even being successful with it.
So, but of course, like, now we've kind of established that it makes sense to compete often or early, like if you want to get better as much as you can. But of course, there's a trade-off. Like, let's say someone starts training today, or like, let's say he starts training on Monday, we probably would not send him to a competition on Saturday.
Oh, absolutely not.
So we like, what do you think? Like, when does he, like, in what time frame does it make sense to start competing, and when is it like too early?
Well, I think maybe somewhere between the 6 months and the first year, probably, because then you have enough time to go through the curriculum, and you get a bit of repetition and you get comfortable in the positions. So you have an idea of what you are doing first of all, and then secondly what your opponent might be doing as well. If you go to competition immediately, then there's a chance you get hurt, or you hurt somebody, or you just do something that is illegal and you get disqualified. If you wait longer, then the further you go, the better your opponents get. So that's the trade-off.
Yeah, for sure. So I completely agree. So I think for me, the minimum you should do is you should know at least a move in all the main positions. That's the absolute minimum, because you need something to go for. You need to know like what the actual goal is. And if you don't have that, then it's just pure chaos. And competition already is a lot of chaos, especially at the lower belts. So you need some kind of frame where you can, like, you have something to go for. Otherwise, you're not actually doing jiu-jitsu, and you might just learn bad habits, I guess, in the end. So I think that's a good time frame you've given there.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing something wrong and you win.
Yeah, which can happen at Weibo, happens all the time.
It's a bad gratification.
All right, so let's bring it a little bit back to the topic. So we were talking about the mental preparation.
Ranting away.
Yeah, but I mean, it's good content, I think. So how did you prepare? What would like? So you mentioned visualization, like.
Yeah. So the visualization. I think I got the recommendation from you, and then I started looking into it a little deeper, watching some videos on YouTube, trying to read some articles. And in the end, sort of putting together a program that I can, follow through, and that I can, practice at home, and that would take maybe, every second day, 15, 20 minutes or something. And the process was the following: I would sit down on a couch, make sure that there's nobody else there, nobody's opening the doors, nobody's walking around, so that you're alone. So it's sort of like this, like a solo meditation, pretty much, but a little more intense is probably the good word. And then I would put on earphones, and to create a situation, to elevate my adrenaline level, and to make it more realistic, I would put on the earphones and then listen to the competition background sounds on a really high volume.
So just to bring it back one step real quick. So basically, when we do visualization, we try to put ourselves as close as possible to the actual situation, right? Like, you're trying to experience it without actually being there, because you want to do it in advance. Now, the problem with this, from my experience, is it is actually really stressful to visualize if you do it correctly, because you're almost getting the tournament stress that you would on the actual competition. So that's something to keep in mind. If you do it right, it will be really stressful and uncomfortable, but that's the whole point of it. So it's basically exposure therapy. We try to expose ourselves to this stress as often in a safe environment as possible, so that we get less and less reaction to the stress. And that's, I think, something that's used in psychology as well, especially with stuff like phobias or other anxiety. Like, you try to expose people slowly and more to the stressor until it becomes less stressful. And that's basically what we're trying to do with those strategies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Yeah, in the end, it is. I mean, you can just compete so many times that you just get your visualization.
Definitely. So every competition adds to the exposure.
Yeah.
But for the first one, you can't or even later ones. Like the more you expose yourself, the less you have to do to get the same experience.
Especially if they're apart. I think my competitions were I did 3, and they were all like a month or 2 apart. So in the meanwhile, you get comfortable again. You forget about this, how it felt like and how it was. And so it's sort of good to bring you mentally at least back to the position, to the same position. And now talking about doing it right, I can say every time I did that session, I would sit down on the couch and it would last something like 15 to 20 minutes. And if I finished the session, my hands were sweating. I had large sort of sweat stains on my shirt. So I was definitely physically also going through that, and I would feel it. I would have a really high pulse, and I would be definitely more heightened than I would normally be when I was just sitting on my couch, right?
Yeah, 100% there with you. Like if I do it right, I get the same feeling for sure. So you mentioned you're listening to the tournament sounds, which is it's a really good thing because you can the audio cue you can recreate 100%. It's the noise you get at the tournament. You can also reproduce at home. You can, the smell, not really. I think.
Well, but then again, it's it's a pretty specific.
Yeah, at least if you've been to a competition, you might be able to at least recall it. So basically, when you visualize, you try to get all senses tuned into the experience. You want to make it as real as possible. So, but the more you can replace with the actual cue, the less your brain has to imagine. So that's why the headphones are a really, really good addition, because now you don't have to think about what it sounds like because you're actually hearing it. The smell, you might not be able to, unless. I don't know how your house smells, but probably not like a tournament area.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. What you see, you can create a mental image. But another thing you can do is watch matches. Maybe put yourself, if that helps you. Personally, I think I visualize pretty good. But if you have trouble with that, you might come up with some other strategies. And the closer you get to the experience, the better it will be for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And also, for example, let's say you already did a good job with your game plan, and you have a sort of a strategy ready, and you know what you were looking for, how you get your grips and everything. Then this is actually something you can try to visualize. And and now I have to go a couple of steps back myself. In addition to then listening to the sound, I would then try to imagine from the very, very first moment when I enter the hall. Being somewhere in a random sports hall, walking in from the entrance, then finding the place where I can, change my clothes, and then, being in a warm-up area, getting ready, walking towards the competition mats, then giving away my ID card, which is something you have to do. They check if you're the right athlete and everything. Then standing next to the mat, waiting for the last match.
Making weight.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's also a very important thing.
Waiting in the warm-up area until you're called can be really stressful.
Yeah, especially if you're left there for a longer time. But I think this sort of comes with the experience. But it's trying to really get this visualization as close to the real situation as possible. And when you do that, then you really have to imagine how do you stand next to the mat. How do you feel when you have a really athletic opponent that's jumping up and down like crazy? How do you greet the referee? So there are many points that are very important.
That's a really good point. So basically, you walk through the whole thing, beginning to end, all the little steps, and every time you're how does this feel like? What does it smell like? What do I hear? What's going on? What do I see? What am I doing? Am I moving? Am I staying warm? How am I staying warm? What am I thinking? There's so much that goes into it, and the more times you go through, you can almost create a routine without doing it, and then you can go through the same steps in a tournament, and you'll feel like you've been there before.
Yeah, and and now probably then getting to the maybe not the most important part, but also a very important part still is you also have to imagine how your competition match goes down, how you get your grips. If you're going to establish some sort of a guard, or you're going to do a takedown, and then imagine going through positions with somebody that you don't know, and then, of course, after the match is over, imagine your hand getting lifted up by the referee, you winning, and then you standing also on the podium, and how that might feel like and everything. So that's also part of it. It's very important.
One thing I think might be important to find out is like, what is actually the thing that stresses you most? I think it's different for different people. Like someone might feel really nervous in the warm-up area, like you're there, people around you, like you know you're gonna get called out, and maybe that's the most stressful thing for you. And once you get called on the mat, you're like, I'm fine, like now it's on, like doesn't matter. While other people might be like fine until like the ref calls you, and you're like, oh, like now this is on. Now this might be hard to tell if it's your first one, but if you have some experience, you might want to like visualize, especially a little bit more the parts where you feel the most stress, I think.
Yeah.
Because it differs from people to person to person.
And your real experience is going to be different than one that you visualize. It's important to know that. And it's also important to know that you're probably able to withstand much higher levels of stress that you could imagine. So it was definitely like my first competition. The first match was, or before that match, all the time in the warm-up area, was definitely mentally and emotionally harder than I would have ever expected. But then again, I went through it, and now I feel really good about it. And it wasn't like it was really bad at that point, but now I feel really, really good about it. So
yeah, for me it's really funny. I always sign up for a tournament out of, like, I don't know why. Now these days I was competing a little bit more before my injury, but before that I would randomly sign up for something. Then I was like, why did I do that? But now I signed up, so I have to do it, get ready, feel all the stress, and like I'm never gonna do this again. I'm at the tournament, I'm like, oh, all right. Then tournament's over, and I get like this high, at least for a week or so, sign up for the next one, and then I'm again like, why did I do this? And it keeps repeating.
Yeah, it depends like what motivates you. I was feeling really good about myself after the competitions, actually, after all of them. But I cannot say that personally that that strategy would have worked for me. So for me, it was like the goal was somewhere elsewhere. Yeah. So like I had to motivate myself differently. But yeah, I think that your strategy might work for.
Actually, these days I would say it's different because now I have more of a goal than I had back then. Back then I was just competing to get better at BJJ, I guess. Like the competition itself was not really that important to me. Now I might be a little bit more result oriented than I was back there, and then it's a different approach for sure as well. Mm-hmm. But I was mostly explaining it because, like for me, after the tournament, you will feel completely different about it than before. Like that was like my, I think.
Yeah, I can.
You cannot imagine how you're gonna feel after while you're in the stress of before.
Yeah,
you're
right.
Gonna be like, no, I'm not gonna like this. I'm never gonna do this again. Or
yeah.
All right, so we talked a little bit about the visualization, and another thing I would mention there, like to go back to the topic, is like we talked. You mentioned the game plan. You're visualizing what you're trying to do, and that's a really important part. And that's if you visualization is like you're doing it for the first time, definitely do that and focus on that. You don't want to make it too complicated in the beginning. It's like a skill you have to learn as well. But once you get a little bit more comfortable with visualization and like you get really into it, it's like Joonas mentioned, like it's not gonna be exactly like you visualize it, like when you're there. You're getting some exposure to the situation, but if you always visualize like it's going the same way and then it's going to go different, it might actually be a bigger stress for you than if you haven't done the preparation, because like suddenly there's chaos. So what you should do is visualize it, like put some chaos in your visualizations. So things go wrong. Like do that. Like, oh, you're weighing in, you're overweight, you have to go run. Or you forgot your ID, you have to run back. Or your gi is the wrong size, you have to change your gi. I don't know, like you're on the mat, like you try to pull guard, but the other guy was quicker, or you get taken down, you're down on points. All those little things that can wrong, like go through them over and over, because the more you do, the more chaos you create, the more comfortable you get with it. Because something will happen. You don't know what, but if you've been there before in your head, it will be a lot easier to deal with.
Yeah, And I can say it's interestingly enough, I've done jiu-jitsu now for about 6 years now, and both in the Europeans and the following Munich Open, in both of those tournaments, I found myself in positions that I felt that I had never been in before. So there can be even chaos in places where you don't expect it. You know, doing jiu-jitsu for 6 years, I thought I've already gone through all the positions, but apparently not. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, so again, you cannot control what's going to happen, but the thing you can control is how you react to it, and that's what we're trying to do with the mental preparation. You cannot control the chaos, but again, you can control your mental state, and as long as you're staying in a good mental state, you will be able to come back. Like, even if someone scores on you, you can still win the match. But if you mentally break when that happens, you've lost.
Yeah.
Then a lot of times you watch tournaments, and if you watch matches, you will see a lot of times when people break mentally. And it might not, maybe not even someone scored, they try their best move and it doesn't work. And some people, it breaks them, they give up. It's you can see after, they don't fight the same way as before. They lose their drive. And that's what you want to avoid. You cannot control the outcome, you cannot control the chaos, but you can control your mental state and at least fight to the best of your abilities on that day.
And I think this is actually a really good, that's a very good point that you're making. Something that I heard when I was getting ready for my first competition that really helped me came from the Chewy BJJ podcast thing, where he said that you have to differentiate between having a lot of adrenaline, which is actually helpful to you. It makes you react faster. You feel stronger, and so on. And nervousness, you have to separate them. And I think this is pretty much what you're saying. If you just follow this adrenaline rush and the nervousness to wherever it takes you, then in the end you're going to be off mentally. But if you're able to separate these two things, and you realize that the nervousness is not serving you in any way, but the adrenaline it's like a natural thing that happens anyway. So you just try to observe it, let it be, and try not to be nervous through the mental cues that you might have. That's actually something we can also talk about. Then it's important to differentiate between those two things.
Yeah, we're getting actually close to the end again, so we might even do a follow-up in that case. To bring it back, just one small thing that helped me a lot in that regard that I want to mention is there's a quote, and actually let me give some background first. So basically the anxiety that you feel, the nervousness that comes with adrenaline, like Joonas mentioned, it's basically the same between it's just excitement and nervousness. It's pretty much the same emotion. It's just how you interpret it. If you can either think it's one or the other, but it's actually the same thing. And one hinders you and one helps you. So the quote that really helped me was make the butterflies fly in formation. You get those butterflies in your stomach, it's chaos, but you can also use that energy and create excitement instead. And that's something I successfully did at the Europeans. I think even both times I was pretty happy with the nervousness. Mm-hmm. And you get nervous, but you're no, I'm not nervous, I'm excited, I'm ready. And then you kind of turn the nervousness into excitement and you can perform really well. Well, on the other hand, if you think it's nervousness, then you're not going to do it. But it feels the same. Yeah.
It's probably very hard to tell apart, but then it is the question of your mental state, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell apart because it's the same. It's only how you think about it. Yeah. All right, we're running out of time already, so sorry about that. It feels like we have to cut those episodes really short. And
well, fortunately, the resource that we have in abundance is time. So
yeah, I guess we'll be back soon. Bye, guys.